Every great empire in history believed it was different, that its values, its institutions, its unique formula would protect it from the fate that had claimed every civilization before it. Rome believed that. Spain believed that. The Soviet Union believed that. Rome, Spain, USSR, they were all wrong. Every single one collapsed through the exact same 7 stages, in the exact same order, without a single exception. There is a specific moment when collapse becomes mathematically inevitable, a threshold that historians can identify in hindsight, but that nobody inside the empire ever recognizes until it is already behind them. By the end of this video, I will show you exactly where that threshold is. But to understand it, you need to see all 7 stages first. What you are about to discover is a collapse pattern that has repeated without exception across every major empire in recorded history. The pattern no civilization has ever escaped. Spain went through all 7 stages. Rome went through all 7. The Soviet Union went through all 7. And today, America is sitting at stage 5. The question is not whether the pattern is unfolding. The question is whether anyone inside the empire can see it in time. Historian Arnold Toynbee spent 40 years studying 26 civilizations and reached an uncomfortable conclusion. Civilizations do not collapse from outside pressure. They collapse from within, following a predictable sequence of self-destruction. As Toynbee himself concluded, civilizations die from suicide, not by murder. That insight became the foundation of what historians now call the 7-stage collapse pattern, a framework validated by the fall of Rome, Spain, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, and the Soviet Union. Every single one followed the same progression, not approximately, exactly. The 7 stages are economic overreach, military overextension, currency debasement, internal fracture, institutional rot, legitimacy crisis, and rapid dissolution. 1. Economic overreach. 2. Military overextension. 3. Currency debasement. 4. Internal fracture. 5. Institutional rot. Through stages 6 and 7. Legitimacy crisis and rapid dissolution. The pattern completes itself. Each stage enables the next. They do not skip steps. Once stage 4 triggers stage 5, stage 6 becomes statistically near certain. That mathematical inevitability is what makes this pattern so disturbing when you lay it directly on top of the United States right now. But first, we need to understand what stage 1 actually looks like from the inside, because it never looks like collapse. It looks exactly like success. But this next one, this is where every empire begins the sequence, and almost nobody inside the empire notices it happening, because in stage 1, everything still looks like it is working. Economic overreach always starts with a seduction. The empire is powerful, it is growing, and so it begins spending more than it produces, borrowing against future prosperity to fund present glory. Rome did it through military conquest. The more territory they controlled, the more legions they needed to guard it. Eventually, the cost of maintaining the empire exceeded what the empire could extract from it. Spend more than you earn. Spain's version was even more dramatic. The gold and silver flooding from the Americas made Spain the wealthiest nation on earth, and simultaneously destroyed its domestic economy. Why manufacture anything when you can simply import it? Within a century, Spain had dismantled its own productive capacity while believing it was thriving. The United States entered this stage in the 1970 when it abandoned the gold standard and formalized it with $33 trillion in national debt, a number growing by $1 trillion every 100 days. If this kind of buried history stops you in your tracks, hit like and subscribe, because we are only getting started. What comes next in this pattern is considerably darker, and the next stage makes the economic problem look like a minor inconvenience by comparison. Now, what I am about to tell you sounds like a paradox, but every historian of empire confirms it without exception. The more powerful an empire's military becomes, the more dangerous that military becomes to the empire itself. Stage 2 is military overextension. It follows stage 1 like a shadow. When an empire borrows to expand economically, it also borrows to expand militarily. And military power is extraordinarily expensive to maintain, and almost impossible to scale back without appearing weak. That trap has no good exits. Rome's legions were stretched across 5,000 miles of frontier at their peak, 70 legions. The cost of maintaining those borders consumed resources that could have reinforced the core. When funds ran short, legions started being paid in debased coins, then in goods, then eventually stopped being loyal to Rome at all. The Soviet Union spent 10 years and $50 billion in Afghanistan, a war they could not win and could not afford not to fight. Wars no victory won. When they withdrew in 1989, the economic damage was irreversible. The United States currently operates over 800 military bases across more than 70 countries. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq consumed over $8 trillion when long-term veterans' care is calculated. $8 trillion for wars that ended without clear victory. And what military overextension inevitably does to a currency is the most predictable and most catastrophic step in the entire sequence. Now forget everything you think you know about money for a moment, because stage 3 is where something abstract becomes brutally real in everyday life. Every empire that has ever overreached economically and militarily has done the exact same thing next. It cheated on its currency. When you cannot pay your bills, you devalue the money. It buys time. And it always destroys the empire slowly from the inside out in a way that is nearly impossible to reverse. Rome's denarius coin was 95% silver when the empire was at its peak. By the 3rd century, it was 5% silver. Roman merchants knew it. Prices doubled, then tripled. The economy buckled under coins the market had stopped trusting. As economist John Maynard Keynes observed about this precise dynamic, by a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of their citizens. Spain experienced catastrophic inflation when New World gold flooded European markets, hollowing out domestic Spanish production. The Ottoman Empire debased its currency 17 times in its final century. The United States dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913. Between 2020 and 2022, the Fed created more money than in the entire previous century combined. More money created in 2 years than in the previous 100 combined. But currency collapse is not what kills empires. It is what currency collapse creates next that historians call truly lethal. Stop and think about this for a second, because stage 4 is the stage that will feel most familiar if you have been paying attention to the world over the last decade. When currency debasement erodes living standards, it does not create unity. It creates blame. It creates factions who are absolutely certain that the other side is the problem. And that certainty makes actual solutions politically impossible. Rome's 3rd century crisis is the defining case study. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome had 50 different emperors, some lasting only weeks. The empire fractured into 3 competing entities simultaneously, not because of external invasion, because internal division made coherent governing impossible. 50 emperors, 50 years. Spanish Empire fractured along religious, ethnic, and economic lines. The Comuneros revolted in Castile. The Catalans declared independence. The Netherlands broke away entirely. Each fracture weakened the center and accelerated the next one. Harvard political scientist Stephen Levitsky, who studies how democracies collapse, published data showing that American political polarization is now measurably worse than in the decade before the Civil War. Not metaphorically, measurably, as Abraham Lincoln, who governed through America's deepest fracture, once warned. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Internal fracture creates the conditions for stage 5. And stage 5 is where collapse becomes, according to the entire historical record, nearly mathematically certain. But what comes next will genuinely disturb you. Here is where the story takes its darkest turn, because stage 5 is where we are right now. And understanding this stage is the most important thing in this entire video. Institutional rot is what happens when the systems designed to govern fairly stop serving the people they were built for, and start serving exclusively the people who control them. It is subtle at first. Then suddenly it is everywhere, and everyone can see it, and nobody knows how to stop it. In Rome, the Praetorian Guard, originally created to protect the emperor, began auctioning the throne to the highest bidder. In 193 AD, they literally put the emperorship up for public auction. The winner lasted 66 days before they killed him and started a new auction. The institutions meant to protect you become the institutions that control you. In Spain, the Inquisition evolved from a religious body into a political weapon used to eliminate economic competitors and silence dissent. In the USSR, the Communist Party apparatus, the institution of the workers' state, became the nomenclatura, a hereditary elite with private hospitals and private stores, while ordinary citizens waited in bread lines. Gallup data shows American trust in Congress now sits at 7%. Trust in media and the Supreme Court are at historic lows. 7% of Americans trust the institution that creates their laws. But institutional rot creates something far more dangerous. Stage 6. And what a legitimacy crisis means for an empire is something no military force in history has ever been able to fix. And the next fact makes everything I have described so far look like a minor footnote. Because stage 6 is when an empire stops being an empire in everything but name. A legitimacy crisis is not merely about corruption. Corruption has existed in every human society since the beginning of recorded history. A legitimacy crisis is when ordinary citizens, not just dissidents, not just the poor, but the broad middle of society, stop believing that the system has the right to govern them at all. When Rome lost legitimacy in its western provinces, citizens stopped defending Roman borders. They did not rebel dramatically. They simply stopped caring whether Rome survived. Edward Gibbon, in his monumental history of Rome's decline, concluded that the empire was not conquered. It was abandoned by its own people. The decline of Rome was the natural and inevitable effect of immoderate greatness. Spain's colonies did not revolt because they hated Spain. They had stopped seeing Spanish authority as legitimate decades before the independence movements formally began. The military conflicts were almost a formality. Mikhail Gorbachev later admitted the Soviet system had lost legitimacy quietly and invisibly long before 1991. The empire dissolved not from military defeat, but because nobody believed in it anymore. When a ruling system loses the belief of its people, what follows is not a slow fade. What follows is the part nobody ever sees coming, and the speed of it will genuinely shock you. What I am about to tell you sounds impossible, but it has been documented across every major empire in the historical record. The actual collapse, when it finally arrives, is not slow. It is shockingly, terrifyingly fast. Historians call this collapse acceleration. The documented phenomenon where once stage 6 is reached, stage 7 does not unfold over decades. It unfolds over months. The Soviet Union was a nuclear superpower controlling half the world's landmass. It had existed for 69 years, and it dissolved, completely, entirely, irrevocably, in 141 days. 141 days. From the failed coup attempt in August 1991 to the formal dissolution in December 1991. A global superpower, gone in less than 5 months. The Western Roman Empire showed identical acceleration. After centuries of gradual decline, the actual end came in rapid sequence. Multiple emperors deposed in a single year, key provinces lost in succession, until in 476 AD, the last Roman emperor was simply removed. No dramatic final battle, no heroic last stand. The empire just stopped being an empire. The Spanish global empire, which had dominated the world for 150 years, collapsed into irrelevance within a single generation after the defeat of the Armada in 1588. Empires do not fade slowly into history. They collapse suddenly the moment the threshold is crossed. And this brings us to the question I have been building towards since the very beginning of this video. America, right now, which stage? And where exactly is the true threshold of no return? Now here is what kept me awake after months of researching this. Not the historical examples. Those are safely in the past. What disturbed me was mapping all 7 stages onto America with actual verifiable data. Stage 1, economic overreach, $33 trillion in national debt, growing by $1 trillion every 100 days. Interest payments alone now exceed the entire defense budget. Stage 2, military overextension. 800 military bases across over 70 countries, 20 years in Afghanistan, total war costs between $8 and $9 trillion. Stage 3, currency debasement. The dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power since 1913. The Federal Reserve created more money between 2020 and 2022 than in the entire previous century combined. Stage 4. Internal fracture. Harvard researchers documented that American polarization is now measurably worse than in the decade before the Civil War. Stage 5. Institutional rot. Congressional approval at 7%, media trust at historic lows, Supreme Court approval dropped 25 points in 1 decade. All 5 stages confirmed. Stages 1 through 5. All present, all documented, all measurable. America is not approaching the pattern. America is inside it, solidly at stage 5, and early measurable indicators of stage 6, the legitimacy crisis, have already begun appearing. Every data point matches what historians found in Rome at stage 5. Which of these 5 stages disturbs you the most? Comment the stage number, because I promised you at the very beginning the exact moment when collapse shifts from possible to certain. That answer is next, and it changes everything. Here is the answer I promised you at the very beginning of this video. The exact threshold, the precise moment, that historians identify as the true point of no return. It is not stage 5. It is not even stage 6. The actual threshold is a specific behavioral shift that occurs deep inside stage 5. And once it happens, the collapse sequence becomes complete, when the ruling class begins protecting itself instead of the system. In Rome, the Senate stopped legislating for Rome and started legislating for its own survival. In Spain, the Habsburg monarchy stopped reinvesting colonial revenues into Spain and started funding private dynastic wars of family honor. In the USSR, the party elite, who publicly preached absolute equality, built private hospitals, private stores, and private vacation compounds, while ordinary citizens waited in bread lines. Each ruling class chose itself over the system it was supposed to protect, and in every historical case, that choice was fatal. The question for America is whether that threshold has already been crossed. The data on wealth concentration, legislative outcomes, and institutional capture strongly suggests it has. But history also teaches something that most people who study collapse miss entirely. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. Some societies redirect. The British Empire managed a controlled decline rather than catastrophic collapse. The Han Dynasty reformed itself at stage 4. Knowing which stage you are in is the beginning of every response that has ever worked. The pattern is real. What you do with that knowledge is the only variable history has ever left open. Every empire that ever fell believed it was the exception. Rome believed it. Spain believed it. The Soviet Union believed it, and they were all wrong, every single one. The 7-stage collapse pattern has never failed to complete itself once it begins. But the pattern also teaches something that most people who study collapse miss entirely. Awareness of where you are in the pattern is the only thing that has ever changed outcomes. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius governed through the early measurable signs of Rome's own institutional decline. He understood that the only response available to a thinking person was not panic, it was clarity. In his own words, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The stages are not a sentence, they are a map. And the difference between a civilization that collapses completely and one that manages its own transition has always come down to whether enough people understood the map before the threshold was fully crossed. You now know more about where America stands in this pattern than most people who will ever live under it. Know the pattern, own it. That knowledge is not comfortable, but it is the beginning of every response that has ever worked in the entire historical record. If you made it through all 7 stages and understand what they mean for the world right now, prove it. Comment stage 5 below, because that is where we are, and the people who know it are already thinking about what comes next. The truth is stranger and more urgent than anything you could make up.